And it's live. Cool. Well, yeah, welcome everybody to the podcast. But yeah, to go over the recent, well, I guess what I wanted to talk about was the expertise debate that's been going on, especially after Douglas Murray was on Joe Rogan and talked about how the importance of expertise and how we need professionals and just experts in their field and how we should overall trust what the consensus from experts are saying. But this Rogan clip that you sent me, was that recent?
Yeah, it
It
was
looks
like
like
a
you
couple
said.
days ago.
Okay, nice. Yeah, we can play the clip here in a little bit, and then it looks like there's also a Mehdi Hassan one that kind of also touches on this. But um, I've been I've been thinking a lot about expertise and how I can take the argument both ways. I can see the argument for expertise, but when you run up against it, and it's not necessarily in a political sense, but when you run up against expertise and you butt heads with expertise and they're not telling you kind of like what you should be hearing, you realize that expertise really doesn't mean that much. Um, and I'm thinking about it more in a context of, like, for example, when if you have a loved one, or you yourself, you're going through something like medical issues. You have a medical condition or your health is compromised in one way or another. And you go to doctors in their respective fields, and people say you should trust doctors, you should go to with what they say. And you start meeting with these different doctors and experts in their field, and they're not giving you the advice that you have an intuition that you should be hearing. And I feel like this is really where that argument, maybe I'm not giving a good holistic view of the argument, but essentially a lot of people after Douglas Murray went on Joe Rogan and started debating people like Dave Smith, the argument became from people like Douglas Murray and Sam Harris that we need experts and we should trust what experts say in general. And we need experts and we should generally trust what the consensus is from experts. And that argument tends to be true. But from experience, what I've seen, especially when it comes to, I think a good example of this is your own personal health or the health of a loved one. You really just start to see the faults or the cracks in that argument. No, I'm not trying to get into too many specifics, but when you're seeing your own health or the health of a loved one, and you're going to these experts and you're asking them for their thoughts or their experience or their recommendations, you really just start to see that it's kind of, we have this imagination in our minds that doctors and professionals are going to give us, they're all going to treat us like it's a TV show and it's like the show House, and they're just going to go at it until they're going to solve all your medical problems. But that's not true. I've dealt with this personally, where I've seen people go to so-called experts and they just get the worst advice. They get advice that, 2 minutes on the internet or chat GPT, and you find better medical advice, and you find medical advice that actually deals with the problem that you're dealing with. Not only that, but when you go back to these experts and then you tell them, hey, this is actually the problem that I'm dealing with, the consensus, even amongst certain fields. So, for example, um, there's a relative of mine that's dealing with Graves' disease, right? Hyperthyroidism. And she was experiencing all these symptoms. She was kind of all the classical symptoms of, being way too hot, shaking, random weight gains, fatigue, things like that, just in general, not feeling healthy. And she kept going to the doctor, kept going to the doctor, and the doctor told her, "Oh, you're just dealing with stress. You're too stressed out. Try to manage your stress." And it kept going like this for a year. This person kept going back to the doctor, kept going to different doctors, and the doctor told her the same thing. And the PA, the physician's assistant or the nurse assistant, whatever her title was, kept saying, "Oh no, you're just stressed. You're not able to deal with stress. You're not managing stress correctly." And so finally, they went on the internet, they went on ChatGPT, they went on Reddit and started looking up the symptoms. And turns out that, she has hyperthyroidism. And for a year of talking to doctors, talking to expert classes, talking to, professionals in their field, it took a 5-minute search on Reddit and ChatGPT to find out that the symptoms that she was dealing with were an actual disease. And to make matters worse, once I started looking into this more, right, one of the recommendations for hyperthyroidism, and this is a consensus in the medical field, is to give you essentially a radiated tablet where you destroy your thyroid, you kill the thyroid through radiation-induced therapy. But I was reading studies that have been coming out, especially over the last year, but this radiation therapy um, increases the risk of cancer in people that go through with this therapy by something ridiculous, like 40 to 60%. Right. And so this is somebody that's relatively young, that has another, hopefully, 30, 40 years of life expectancy left. And these doctors and the professional field were ready to give somebody radiation treatment that was going to potentially give them, or was going to give them, a 30 to 40% increase, maybe more, 50% increase in cancer. And so this is just kind of what sparked that that feeling that professionals, or I know I'm rambling, but this just kind of sparked that feeling that experts in their field, as much as we should kind of go with that intuition that we should trust the experts, it's not always, when you start to dig a little bit deeper, it's not always the case. And there's always cracks or flaws in that hypothesis
Yeah,
or theory.
it's funny that you say that. I don't know if you heard the recent podcast with Naval Ravikant and on the Modern Wisdom podcast.
No, I haven't heard.
I mean, you know Naval, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he just talks about how, modern medicine, there's still so much that we don't know, and that, there's still like we don't really have good explanatory theories in biology as like a whole holistic explanation as to what's going on in the body, and why modern medicine is still, we're still putting a lot of faith in it that isn't necessarily warranted. We can pull up the clip if you want, but yeah, it just goes to what you're talking about, that medicine in particular, that's still like the human body is such a complicated thing that, there's still you're better off in a way just going with ChatGPT if something's wrong with you than, a doctor, and or just asking ChatGPT what's wrong with you versus a doctor. I think there's
Even
studies
Reddit.
out. Huh?
Even Reddit.
Yeah, I think there's now like studies that are showing that you're better off just asking, ChatGPT's better at diagnosing, or Reddit, than a human biased mind. And yeah, I mean it goes to what it is complicated, because I think it the idea of expertise, I agree with Sam Harris and Douglas Murray that it is something that we should value. The concept of being an expert in a thing, we should value that, and we should value people that dedicate their time towards learning something and knowing something about it, versus people that don't have anything to do with that particular field. But it does vary, because there are certain fields where even being a quote unquote expert isn't necessarily going to mean that you know what you're talking about, or that you can give good advice, or that you're good at what you do. It's like a heuristic. Like we should want, like, if you need your plumbing done, you should go to a plumber. If you want to go learn jujitsu, you should go to a black belt. And there's reasons why we value things like expertise, but yeah, we shouldn't just become, you know, just blindly following anything the quote unquote experts say. And again, even Douglas Murray, I feel like, would agree with this. He agreed with everything that went wrong during COVID, and our over emphasis on believing with whatever, trusting the experts, following the science. We should always be skeptical, while maintaining that that healthy balance of skepticism and just gullibility. You don't want to just believe anything you're told, and at the same time, you don't want to just dismiss everything that you're told as well. So yeah, I mean, I do agree with you in the medical field. I think I saw a study that Jordan Peterson repeated. I don't know the exact number, but I think that there's like a significant, if not more, deaths that are caused by, human incompetence in the medical field versus like human lives that are saved. Again, I'm not 100% sure on the exact statistic, but it's crazy how many lives are lost every year just strictly due to human incompetence. And and yeah,
Yeah, especially in medicine. Medicine is one of the better examples, especially when you're talking about expertise. And I think that was a good way of putting it, in a sense, naive to live your life this way. If you want to hear what the experts have to say, you want their feedback, but ultimately, when your life is on the line with medical advice, you don't want to be so naive. You want to take those decisions, and you want to take your own intuitions, and hopefully you're doing your own research into your own hands. Sam consistently brings up this argument about pilots. Okay, well, let's look at pilots. Our airways right now are kind of a mess. The FAA is a disaster. It consistently has problems. And we unfortunately just had an accident, 3 or 4 months ago, where a plane and a helicopter crashed. And all the experts within their fields that day were doing what experts do. The pilot was flying the plane correctly. The air traffic controller was doing their job as best as possible. The Army helicopter pilot was flying a little bit too high, but within their respective fields, they were all doing, they were all the experts. They were all the people that Sam said we should trust. And yet we still had, sorry, I'm getting a notification.
yeah, but I don't necessarily think, nobody's arguing that experts are infallible.
No, it's not that, but ultimately the point that I'm trying to make is it it would be very naive to live your life only trusting what experts are saying. And I agree with the sense that we should trust what experts are saying, especially if you don't have any knowledge in a certain field, or especially if you're making mistakes that an expert can help you correct. And this is where people like Dave Smith come in, where he's making arguments that a lot of people have already fleshed out, have already ironed out, and experts in that class can tell you this is not the case with XYZ, right? Gaza is not a concentration camp, or the blockades aren't affecting Gazans the way that you think that they're affecting. And that's where expertise really does matter. But in a much broader sense, expertise and this naivety, or this naive worldview, in a sense that only trusting what experts are saying or only going with the consensus, I think it's a much better way to live your life if you take what experts say and you kind of also go with your own intuition. You do your own bit of research and apply your own critical thinking and your own knowledge and your own experience, especially when it comes to medicine, because you're ultimately the one that is dealing with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good way of putting it that I saw is blind obedience to credentialed authority associated with the left, or trust in a marketplace of ideas that rewards brain rotting infotainment associated with the right, are both failed strategies. And yeah, I mean, again, it's about having a careful balance. And another thread that I think that is important to talk about in this issue is I think this happened during the Rogan Murray debate a lot. Is I think it's so important when debating people is to like get your definitions just laid out on the table before anything. And I think what Rogan was doing was he was conflating expertise, or at least the way Murray was talking about expertise, with credentialism. And he assumed, him and Dave Smith, that in order to have an opinion on anything, Murray was arguing that you needed to have credentials. And I think that, that's a mistake. I don't think Murray, and I've heard, subsequent podcasts of Murray, that wasn't the point that he was trying to make. But that is a point that a lot of people, especially on the left now currently, make about expertise, right? They try to claim that if you're not credentialed, if you don't have a degree, if you don't have a master's or whatever, then your opinion, we can just dismiss your opinion. And we saw so much of this, especially during COVID, where people were just, we can ignore you because you're not a quote unquote scientist, or because you're not, or because you don't have a degree in Columbia, right? We overvalue the importance of credentials. Mehdi Hassan is talking about the Murray debate, but he talks about the argument that Murray made about being an expert, and then what Mehdi says is that, well, I agree with what Douglas Murray is saying, but Douglas Murray has a degree in English, or he has a degree in literature or something like that. And what gives him the right to comment on, foreign policy or world relations or Israel or Ukraine? He has a degree in Oxford from English or whatever. See, this is the point, that if you don't have a degree in something, then shut the fuck up. What degree does Mehdi Hassan have? And again, you saw so much of this during COVID, and it also reminded me too of this was way back in like 2014, 2015, where the Reza Aslan Sam Harris debate was going on about Islam, and Reza Aslan would say the same thing, that you're not an expert, Sam, on religion. I'm an expert in religion. I have a degree in religion. You have a degree in neuroscience. I'm sure you're a great neuroscientist, but you don't get to talk about religion because you're not an expert, or you're not credentialed on it. And that's where I think that argument just completely falls flat. And we have to be, worried, or not worried, but aware of it, is because, this idea, just because you went to school, just because you have a degree in something, that automatically gives you a pass to be right, or you don't have to deal with the actual arguments that you're making, or somebody that doesn't necessarily have a degree in something has to shut up. That argument just on its face is so ridiculous. And Mehdi Hassan himself, I'm sure, does not at all abide by that standard when he's commenting on every other different political issue right now, and what degrees he majored in. And so, yeah, I think that if you want to pull up that Rogan clip as well, where he kind of talks about this too, where this was a couple days ago, and he's talking about the Murray thing, and he's like, oh, he's a great guy, but he's an English major, he's not an expert in Ukraine, he's an English major, so shut the fuck
Yeah,
up.
I think these people are confusing credentialism with expertise.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
credentialism, it's not the same thing. The credentialism, it gives you a brief window of what somebody, if somebody's speaking at a conference or somebody's speaking on a podcast, and it's a quick avenue, a quick screenshot of their accomplishments. But just being credentialed, just having a PhD in a certain topic, doesn't really mean anything other than the fact that if you're making a claim on a certain topic, you want to check whether or not this person knows what they're talking about, and whether or not you should continue paying attention. So, but yeah, just arguing from credentialism, it's not really a valid point. I don't think that was the point that Douglas Murray was making, but um, yeah,
No, I mean,
it's
it
overall,
wasn't. It wasn't. He wasn't making a
yeah,
credentialist argument. He was making a expertise argument that, okay, this idea of expertise is something that is real. We acknowledge it in almost every field, and it doesn't mean we should treat these people as saints and abide by every word they say. And different fields have different levels of expertise and areas of knowledge, and some areas we know less than people are care to admit than others. But again, it doesn't mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater just because there are problems with expertise. What you need is is better expertise. If an expert is failing at something or a field is failing, what you need is better science, better expertise, more like probing, figuring out like, okay, the medical field right now is not
Yeah.
is not as
I just think
successful.
it's a it's a difficult line to walk or just thread. It's like because it's so consequential, especially when you're talking about medicine or even things like lockdown, which maybe is a little bit of easier of a conversation to have. We saw firsthand in COVID how the expert class kept fucking up, kept not not having any self-awareness, or and it was just so politically motivated, and they were obviously doing it to go against Trump and Trumpism and to try to combat perceived racism, and all of the data that was staring him in the face kept saying lockdowns are ineffective, these social distancing policies are ineffective, and you're doing real harm to people, you're doing real harm to the economy. And it was 2 3 years of this expert class not willing to concede any of these points. And
But this is where it
it's
wasn't there's not like this like broad expert class just doing the class that was responsible for that was the infectious disease expertise class. They're the ones who failed in that specific regard because
yeah,
this is the again the problem with expertise, or with the problem with overvaluing certain people in their intelligence, because you can be an expert in one field and that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate onto things like public policy, or things like what type of reaction should we have to things like COVID. The fact that about infectious diseases, and that about what the origins of COVID and how viruses spread, that's important, that matters. Obviously we would want your opinion, but we shouldn't just rely on the expert class on infectious diseases to dictate public policy, when public policy involves so many other things like the economy, the human well-being, so many other aspects. And that was our failure. We depended too much on a specific subset of experts while ignoring other people that were experts in that field as well, saying different things. And it should have been a more holistic approach towards our policy, and we just completely avoided that, and we just made Fauci and his crew the saints and allowed them to dictate public policy. And again, it's
but I think there's two arguments there. I think there's two arguments going on, and one is the expert class or experts in their field need to be willing to have more conversations and more self-awareness and willing to concede when good arguments are being made, even by so-called non-experts. If somebody makes a good argument, if somebody brings evidence and reason and logic to a debate, regardless of whether or not you're an expert, the quote unquote expert class, whoever this shadowy figures might be, need to be willing to concede that there are other arguments or good arguments to be heard. And that's essentially what was missing from COVID. The argument with Israel and Gaza, that argument is happening at such a low IQ level, at such a basic ass. These arguments don't hold any water. These arguments are not convincing. The Mehdi Hassan, the Owen Jones style, the Dave Smith style arguments, there's a reason these arguments are being dismissed and laughed at by real experts, by anybody with half a brain. Because what are they actually arguing for? They're arguing for, a lot of them are arguing that Israel shouldn't exist. A lot of them are arguing that Israel shouldn't defend itself from Hamas. And these arguments, just when you scrutinize them, they're just not feasible. They're not reasonable. You can't have a Jewish state and Israelis existing next to genocidally bent neighbors that all of their everything that they're motivated by, everything, their whole existence is literally built and founded upon murdering Jews. And I get this is why it's so frustrating, because these debates are happening on different levels. The Israel Gaza debate is just happening at this low hanging fruit, low IQ level where, okay, dude, all of these debates, it's like, it's almost equivalent or analogous to a a new chess player or a novice chess player going up to Magnus Carlsen or Gary Kasparian and saying, "I have all these interesting ideas for chess moves, and I have these great inventions, and this is how I'm going to start opening chess, and this is how I'm going to play," and where they just get destroyed right away. And this is where expertise really is highlighted. And I agree that, maybe during COVID, the debate was a little bit more nuanced. Maybe there were at certain points arguments where lockdowns aren't the most insane strategy. They sometimes can be effective, especially when you're talking about respiratory viruses and viruses that spread between people. But I just feel ultimately that there's multiple debates happening here, and these retards like Mehdi Hassan and Owen Jones and Dave Smith, they're just operating at low ass levels, like bottom of the
But I mean,
barrel, like low IQ. Like these arguments have already tried to be hashed out and we've reached a consensus. And I just feel like they need to make better arguments. And
I don't think we've reached a consensus at all. I think most people right now are reasoning through emotion. They're not reasoning through logic, and I think people, because of that, are seeing the images coming out of Israel, and I think Israel has been successfully made to be the enemy. And yeah, I think that, sadly, the pro-Israel side, just because of the frequent horrific images that we've seen coming out of Gaza for almost a year and a half now, I think that we've lost that debate on a pure emotional standpoint where it isn't. But getting back to the point, I'm curious as to how you square this idea of expertise when you originally were, in a way, arguing against it in the medical field, but now you're kind of saying that, well, it is valid in a way. And I don't know how you try to.
I think there's just levels to expertise, and there's levels to the types of questions that you're asking. If you if you're experiencing certain symptoms and you go to your doctor and you test positive for COVID and you have a fever, and you're experiencing all of the tall tale signs, all the classic symptoms of having a cold, and your doctor tells you tested positive for COVID, you have a cold, go home, sit down. 99% of the time, 90% of the time, your doctor's going to be right. And you should trust what your doctor is saying. Are you going to subsequently push back and say, no, doctor, I'm convinced it's something else. I'm convinced I have cancer. I'm convinced I have, I'm having septic shock, or something's horribly wrong. What are the odds that that's actually true when all of the signs, all of the tests, all of the symptoms are pointing to you having COVID or some disease? And the reason I bring this up is because it just happened to me. We went to the doctor. The doctor told us you're pretty much you've you're showing all the telltale signs, all the symptoms of having a respiratory virus. Just go home, relax, right? You're not gonna die. Just come back if something really bad happens. And it's been a couple weeks, and sure enough, nothing really bad happened, right? When it comes to now, if these symptoms persisted, if the symptoms persisted, and I kept coming back to the professional, the expert class, and I kept saying, doctor, something's wrong. It's been 2 weeks. My symptoms aren't going away. I still have body aches. I still have a fever, persistent fever. I have fatigue, and something just feels off. And if your doctor continuously tells you, no, you know what, it's your your body's just slowly healing, just go home, wait it out another 2 weeks, and you wait another 2 weeks, and the same thing happens. And now it's been 2 months, and you're dealing with these symptoms consistently, and in your gut, it's been 2 months. They told me it was going to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and in your gut something's wrong. At that point, your intuition should tell you, maybe I should go to get a different opinion. Maybe I should go see a different doctor, right? Like something's wrong. And this is how you square it away with, this is how I square away the argument with experts is, okay, trust the expert class when and okay, all the symptoms, everything lined up with what was expected. As soon as the expectations start to turn towards something else, as soon as you start seeing something, hey, something feels off here. We keep seeing the same, right? It's something you keep telling me that one answer, but it just feels different. It feels like it's not right. That's when I think you should start to do your own research and start to go with your own intuition. Maybe get a second opinion, maybe get experience from other doctors, other people, see what they have to say. And that, that little story, that analogy, I think is applicable to so many things. Like, and it's applicable to this thing that we saw with Joe Rogan. It's applicable to these debates that we continue to see with Dave Smith and Owen Jones and Mehdi Hassan. These people keep making the same arguments and they keep just bringing up the same points. And we keep telling them, this is what's going to happen. And these are the reasons why you're wrong. These are all the things that experts and many expert classes have told them. This is why you're continuously wrong. And if it just seems like they just want to keep rehashing the same debate and they're not really offering anything new, anything substantial. And that,
Yeah, but I
I don't
mean,
know if that connection makes sense, but
they're kind of doing what you're doing in the sense that, well, I'm gonna do my own research. I don't really care what the quote unquote experts say. I get what you're
I think
saying though. Or go ahead.
to connect the dots, I think the Mehdi Hassan class, these people that is the Dave Smiths, they just have to realize that they themselves are not open to good arguments and they themselves are just not open to good or evidence or reasonable arguments. Yeah, ultimately it would be analogous to somebody. It's like a hypochondriac to an extent. They're just convinced that something is wrong and they keep going back to the doctor and they tell the doctor, I'm sick, something's wrong, something's off, I don't feel right. And it's just been months and months
But
and
that's
months.
what you were kind of describing right now.
What's that?
Weren't you describing that you kept going to the doctor and they kept telling you nothing was wrong?
I went to the doctor and they told me nothing was wrong. But this was just my case, right? But for a different person, they felt something was wrong and they kept going back to the doctor and that something was wrong, right? It took
Hmm.
almost a year for them to find out that something was wrong. And I understand that it's this balance, right? And it's difficult to put into words, but it's just these people like Dave Smith keep making the same arguments and they keep saying the same things. And you're not getting the results where I feel like Dave Smith and Mehdi Hassan and all these people, if their arguments were good enough, if their intuitions were strong enough, like ultimately you're going to get to the correct answer. But there's a reason why their arguments just, when they're scrutinized by a lot of people, right? And this is why you need to diversify this goes back to the criticism of the expert class is, they need to be willing to listen to good arguments. They need to be able to diversify the sources of their information and not just lean on credentialism. I agree that there's this, truth that good arguments should win and good arguments and good evidence should at the ultimately, win out. If you like, maybe I'm not making the connection, but if you just keep making the same bad arguments and expecting something different, like, I'm sorry, but I don't know what else to say. Like, it's just bad arguments. Like, you're not going to win. Like, you're not going to
Yeah, I mean,
convince anybody.
I think to get to like a clear point, that whole credentialing or yeah, the whole expertise thing, like I think Murray honestly harped on it a little bit too much. Again, I get what his point is, and expertise is something that we should value, while at the same time, we shouldn't depend on these people for everything. But I think ultimately what matters at the end of the day is like the arguments that you're making and the are you making sense or are you not? Like are you logically making coherent arguments that are relevant or are you not? And ultimately that's what I hate saying it because he's Dave Smith, but he did kind of emphasize that, like, okay, you may be right about or wrong about expertise, but let's get to the point, let's get to the debate, let's get to the actual meat of the arguments. And I think Murray was just harping on too much about, traveling to places and, having been there, and, all this stuff where it's like, okay, I get the point that you're trying to make. But at the end of the day, what matters is your arguments. What matters is, are you actually making historical points that are historically accurate? And that is one of the good things, putting aside all this expertise talk about things like AI, having ChatGPT, having the ability to like instantly fact check people or instantly source whatever claim, that is being made, I think is super important, especially right now when there is so much misinformation, quote unquote, about things like Israel, Palestine, about things like Ukraine and Russia, especially the historical perspective on things, because history, you're right, it's history isn't really a matter of like argument, because history, you know, either something is a historical fact or is it not. Things like 1948, the when Palestine attacked Israel, right? Did it attack Israel or did it not? Things like that, like, or the Ukrainian Russian war, in 1993, was there a promise to not increase or not expand NATO, or was there not? Did we guarantee security for Ukraine in 1993, or did we not? These are things that we can factually check, especially with this like recent example of Daryl Cooper, where he goes on to say all these outlandish things on the Tucker Carlson podcast late last year. And, you can fact check all that, most of the things that he was saying. He was trying to imply that Churchill was financed by Jewish bankers, that the Nazis didn't really want to, didn't really mean to kill all those Jews, that it was mostly that they had all these prisoners and they didn't know what to do with them, and that Hitler wasn't really, he was hiding his anti-Semitism. These are all claims that are historically either valid or they're not, and you can fact check these things. You can Google, not just Google them, but you can have AI as a tool. You can deep research, not just ChatGPT, because ChatGPT does have a liberal bent, but you can use these like super powerful engines to get at the truth. And yeah, I think that, not to ramble on, but it is one of the more exciting things about the current world that we're living in, is because you can get just instantly fact checked. I don't know if you saw the Ethan Klein Hassan debate. It was super long, but there's like really interesting parts from it. Did you catch anything at
No, I
all
didn't
from it?
see it.
I mean, it's good because just Hassan just gets completely destroyed pretty much for like 5 hours straight. I'm not the biggest Ethan Klein fan. He's also a lefty, but there's like specific areas where Hassan just had no response at all towards the things that Ethan was saying. That Ethan's made an argument that the Jews were expelled and kicked out of their countries after 1948 in the Middle East. The Arab Jews, the Middle Eastern Jews, they were kicked out. And Hassan was trying to say that no, it was because of Zionism, like they chose to leave from their own volition. And it's just like an hour straight of just Ethan just like fact checking him live, and just Hassan's just like has no response, and he just starts yelling like a maniac, like, you're a racist, you piece of shit. And yeah, again, it's one of the good things about the world that we live in. And yeah, I guess just to get at something, is that expertise, again, is something that we should value. It matters, right? We have experts for a reason, but these people are not saints, and we're allowed to criticize them. And you can see, right, you can see how consensus can build and in-group type mentalities can build. And that may be a problem right now in the medical field, where things more like holistic approaches to medicine, I'm not talking about like the heebie-jeebie or woo-woo type medicines, but there are alternative, quote unquote, forms of medicine, like meditation, like holistic, like being at peace, or different avenues, psychedelic medicine, that can be beneficial, not just trying to quote unquote treat a problem by giving you a medicine or giving you Tylenol. There's other ways of approaching medicine that I think a lot of scientists or doctors are, very averse to trying because it's not fitting neatly into the scientific consensus. And yeah, it's always good to have that outside criticism of any certain field because the people in that field might not necessarily be the best people to judge. And so yeah, it's just about balancing it and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And most people recognize this. In that Rogan clip, I don't know if you want to put it up, is that exactly where he talks about Murray, and he's saying the same thing that Mehdi Hassan said about Murray, where he's saying that Murray only has a bachelor's or whatever in Oxford. Or I'll let you play it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'll play right now.
Yeah, that was the last part was the clip that I saw, not the first part. But yeah, it gets to what we were saying. It was a misunderstanding because Rogan and Dave Smith, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, but I think they thought what Murray meant was credentialism, or are you credentialed? And yeah, I think that Murray meant this game that people like Dave Smith try to play, where I'm just a comedian, bro. If you get called out, you apparently spend all your time talking about these issues.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's just it's hard. It's difficult to close the loop on this because, where does expertise begin and, where does it start where someone's just asking questions and bringing up good arguments. But
yeah, yeah. Because
it's
the
it's
first part,
difficult
I
because you
agreed
want
with
to,
with Rogan. The first part,
yeah.
because it's just
Uh,
like, yeah, just I get what he was saying. Like, dude, you can keep harping on this expert thing all you want, but like at the end of the day, like let's get to the point. And Murray had, if he would have done more research, like there's so much things wrong that he could have told Daryl Rogan about Daryl Cooper, about Dave Smith, like so much stupid shit that they've
yeah.
said. That would have been
I
a
feel
way
like Douglas
better. It
Murray
was a
went
wasted
into that debate.
opportunity.
Yeah, he went into it like very unprepared on to speak about Daryl Cooper.
Yeah.
It just seemed like he spark noted it and wanted to bring up a broader debate with Joe Rogan, and he didn't seem like he quite knew. And it's difficult to do in person. It's very easy. I had all these grandiose thoughts earlier today and throughout the week about how I was going to say certain things. And then you actually get in the moment and your brain starts farting and you go, what the hell am I even saying? This is not what I wanted to say. So I get it. It's very difficult in person. And to Douglas Murray's defense, or to credit, I understand what he was trying to say, but also I felt like he was very unprepared. And I don't really know where we've lost touch with this whole expert thing. I don't know why it's gotten so complicated to understand. It doesn't, at face value, it doesn't seem that complicated. But then when you start to dig into it, it just becomes like, how do we really define expertise and how do we really define what it is that we're looking for? And the medical thing, to close the loop on that, yeah, it is almost, I view Dave Smith like a hypochondriac, somebody that goes to the doctor and just isn't getting the answers that they want. But then there's very real world scenarios where people that continuously go to the doctor and feel like something is wrong, sometimes that does pan out. And sometimes that is reality. And sometimes, oh shit, these doctors were wrong. And I went to 4 or 5 doctors and they all told me the same thing and basically told me to fuck off. And the sixth doctor finally understood and took me seriously. And now turns out I have this disease that now I'm dealing with. And where's that line? Where's that divide? When do you stop trying to break through and have your argument heard? And with medical issues, it's maybe a little more black and white because there's a definitive answer. But with politics, it's just so hard because it becomes so subjective so easily and so quickly. And it's really hard to know where, when is it enough to just keep making these arguments or to push back. But to answer on that Joe Rogan point, I did feel like Douglas wasn't arguing with Dave Smith, he was more or less just telling him, "You're not an expert on certain subjects." And it would have been nice to see Douglas debate on both Ukraine issues and Israel, because I think he's generally right on these topics and Dave Smith is wrong. And but that's not to give Joe Rogan and Dave Smith a pass.
I mean,
I think
he did debate him. What do you mean? On both
I
of the
felt like
issues?
he did debate him, but it felt like he wasn't addressing Dave Smith's points a lot of times directly. And
Yeah, I
just
think
it felt
that
like
was
overall,
that
like,
was the bigger the point
yeah.
of everything is that like
Just to
I
close
think
the loop on this
or go
point
ahead,
is,
sorry.
I also the other side, the Dave Smiths, the Joe Rogans, all these people that have just been spouting their mouths and yapping, like these people need to. They are so conceited, and they don't realize that they themselves are not open to good arguments. Like I think you mentioned this in the other podcast we did, but they've already reached a conclusion, and it just shows. Like Joe Rogan learned nothing from this Douglas Murray thing. He just said, "Oh, I've had people that agree with me or are pro-Israel." Like that's it. That's the content. That's what you took away. Like that's the argument. That wasn't the point that Douglas Murray was trying to make. And the same thing with Dave Smith is that they're so close-minded and not willing to listen to other arguments that I think they should be rightly criticized for that.
I mean, they're clearly ideological, and it's so funny because people like Rogan harp against things like ideology and you know being open-minded, and yeah, Rogan's just become this you know boomer type he's not willing to hear other people's arguments or at least hear other people out, and yeah, it's sad. It's sad, but yeah, I don't know. I think we've kind of ran this issue to the.
Right. That's it. The other one you want to talk about was Camille and race.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
actually pretty
Go ahead.
pleasantly surprised with it's not so much about the race thing, but like Moynihan's inner neocon came out, and I was
Hmm.
pretty happy to see that. That one,
Oh, the first half of the podcast.
yeah, that was interesting because I've kind of arrived at the same conclusion with them. When I was younger, not younger, but I still have that neoconservative bent where, and it's not a bad intuition, but I would like to see the rest of the world live under some kind of liberal democracy where everybody has rights. And call me crazy, but I like to see humans have rights and have the ability to say what they want, think what they want, and believe what they want without anybody telling them otherwise, and be able to criticize their governments. And apparently, that makes me a neocon, to want that. But it was interesting to hear them come to similar conclusions to where I'm at now in my life, where unfortunately, that's not to say the whole world, but a lot of the world, especially in places like the Middle East or in East Asia, places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, um, they just don't seem to care, or this is not a priority for them. Um, a lot of these countries are, still very religious, and Islam has got an iron grip on these places, and much of the population just is not interested in living under a liberal democracy. And as much as it breaks my heart to see other people suffer and live under these authoritarian regimes, what's worse, initiating wars and starting these wars and trying to regime change, and then you're dealing with these quagmires like Afghanistan and Iraq, and you're spending trillions of dollars, and you're seeing tens of thousands of American soldiers die, and half the population doesn't even want what you're serving. And it sucks. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's almost like conceding or admitting defeat to some extent, but it is what it is, unless the rest of the world or these parts of the world drastically change or show that they really want, what it is that America has to offer, then I don't think we can continue just spending our own resources and soldiers and all these things that comes with regime change.
Yeah, I think the consensus that they reached later in that conversation, it's just about common sense. I think there's valid arguments on both sides of isolationist versus, hawkish type foreign policy debates. You don't want to just be randomly invading countries just for democracy in America. Fuck yeah. But at the same time, you don't want to entirely isolate yourself from the world, because, you might not be interested in the world, but the world is interested in you. And okay, we allow the world to do what it wants, but those places that we create these vacuums are going to get filled by somebody. And yeah, it's about just really just common sense and being practical and learning from prior mistakes. There is no absolute answer. There's no clear answer to anything. You have to take everything. It's all circumstantial. It's all specific. It's mostly anecdotal. And you can draw different lessons from different recent historical invasions or non-invasions, right? You can point to Iraq 2003 and you can talk about how, that was a big mistake. But then at the same time, you can point to Obama pulling out in 2009, 2010, and that leading to that creating a vacuum for ISIS to thrive. So you can criticize the initial, but you can also criticize the fact that we pulled out. And the same thing with Afghanistan. You can make a really coherent argument as to say, well, obviously we had to go after the guy that just attacked us in 2001, September 11th. But at the same time, okay, did that mean that we have to be there for another 20 years just to pull out for that same Taliban group to take over? And you can, that again, this gets back to what I said in the previous podcast about there being a grain of truth in most of what people say. And so yeah, I think that we have to dissuade ourselves from just always jumping to absolute answers and just broadly know all interventions are always bad and forever wars and no neocons, and uh, it's all just silly, right? This is why people like Dave Smith are so boring. They're so boring because you already know what their positions are going to be on you don't you already know what any foreign policy position, any historical foreign policy, it's always the same answer. It's always the same. They already have their ideological bent towards these issues, and it's boring. It's just like predictable. It's like we know what you're going to say. We know whose side you're going to take. And it's a good heuristic to have to weeding out the people you should listen to and not listen to. And you should not listen to the people that are, one, predictable, and two, just always come towards conclude the same answer over and over. How is it that ever since the end of World War II, and now not even the end of World War II, also in the our involvement in Nazi Germany, how is it that every single time America or the West always is on the bad, they're always the bad guys, no matter what. It's always the same answer. North Korea, South Korea, every single one. And yeah, it's ideological. It's boring. It's lazy, and this is what these people, portray. And again, you can look at it on the other side of the spectrum as well. We're not gonna. Doesn't make sense to just freely willy just invade. And you can make the argument as to why we don't want to just bomb people for the fuck of bombing them. And a recent story really pissed me off. And again, this is why these things are complicated. And I see these arguments that are made on the anti-interventionist side, and I take it. I don't agree with it necessarily, but I see where they're coming from, because I think like a week or two ago when Trump bombed Yemen, initially I was pro that bombing, because again, I don't think it's right that Yemen is just invading or, terrorizing, pirating these ships and just doing what they want to civilian ships. And I think we should try to deter that. So I did agree with that initial bombing, but now it's coming out that I don't know how real this is, but there are reports that are coming out that we bombed some African migrant center and a bunch of innocent people died, and we like didn't even kill any Yemeni terrorist. And so again, you see these types of things and it's like, well, what are we doing? Like, it doesn't like, dude, these people's lives that are lost, like, imagine like how horrible that is. Like, how are we the good guys? And okay, we can have that excuse of it wasn't intentional or it was a mistake, but again, these are people that are dying, and it's not right. And another thing that helped me view this like perspective again that I don't agree with, but it helped me put myself in that position a little bit more, was what's going on right now in Mexico, where Trump's trying to designate the cartels as terrorists. And if he does that successfully, technically that would allow him to drone strike Mexico. And I just started thinking like it's kind of sounds silly to think about it, but I was like an example of like, well, wait, like what if I'm just, casually driving in Mexico, I happen to be in TJ one day. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but what if I were to experience maybe close by or, God forbid me be a victim of collateral damage to this drone strike, you know, I see that argument of we should be very careful of how we conduct these military strikes, the potential of the backlash that it may cause on these societies. And yeah, there's no easy answers, and this is what bothers me with a lot of these anti-war quote unquote people, is that you don't hear these types of analysis from them. It's all just, oh, America's evil, and we just bomb people for the sake of bomb. They're not grappling with like the actual complicated nature of the things that we're dealing with, right? Do we kill a terrorist that is potentially going to kill more people down the line while risking killing innocent civilians in the process? Or do we allow the terrorist to live because we are going to kill innocent civilians in the process of killing him? And then, right, which way do we go? And these are super complicated questions. And I think that a lot of the people on the anti-war, they don't want to grapple with these questions head on. And it's all just, oh, America's evil. And yeah,
Yeah,
so
their answers are usually unsatisfactory, but it's the temptation to use to have the temptation with the weaponry that we have right now is very high. It's very tempting to just drop a bomb, to drone strike somebody and say, well, it was just collateral damage. And I think that's the conundrum that Israel currently finds itself in. And now they're ramping it up and saying we're going to fully invade Gaza and we're planning to take it over. And you would hope that Israel and other nations would take history lessons from what the U.S. did. A little, obviously, it's different because Israel and Gaza are neighbors, and the U.S. and Afghanistan weren't. But I think there's lessons to take from that, and Israel is going down that same path of embedding itself in the population, embedding itself in this area that nobody wants it in. Israelis don't want it in. Gazans don't want Israelis there, and Israel is going to start losing soldiers. It's going to start losing, its own sons and daughters to Hamas militants, and it's going down the same path that the U.S. went down in Afghanistan. And while I agreed the long-term invasion of Afghanistan was probably a good thing, we were keeping the Taliban out of power, and there was some semblance of hope for women in Afghanistan. The American population just lost patience for it. And there was a good argument that we should have lost our patience with it and we should have been more decisive in Afghanistan. And yeah, these foreign policy issues are complicated because I can see them both ways. I can see the argument for why we should drop a bomb on, a high level terrorist operative, but 10, 15 people are going to die. Um, And I also agree with the fact that we need to be a lot more careful. There's story after story after story that comes out where, Israeli drone strikes or American drone strike killed, 7 hospital workers or, killed innocents or killed, Red Cross or the people that were delivering food. And yeah, these views are nuanced and complicated, and there's no easy answers, and it's just it, I don't know. The temptation's always there, and you would hope that the right people are in power, and you just hope that these people are going to be measured and calculated, but it doesn't always feel that way. It doesn't always feel like the best decisions are being made, especially when you hear these stories of civilians dying, and you wonder, well, what would I do if that was me? What would happen if that was my family? And yeah, it's unfortunately there's no easy answers, and part of me still leans towards military solutions because I don't see political solutions. Ultimately, there's no. I think with the cartels, it's a little bit different because ultimately they're motivated by money, and I think you can essentially buy these people out. They're not ideologically motivated. There was a good video, I'll send it to you, from real life lore. But the cartels are not ideologically driven. They're just motivated by money. They want to make money. And the issue that Israel and a lot of us face, luckily we're separated by oceans, but these countries, like I was mentioning before, they're all ideological. They're all ideologically driven. They're all ideologically embedded. It's just this issue with Islam that Muslims don't, especially the hardcore, Islamists, jihadists, they're never going to give it up. They're going to fight tooth and nail, and they're going to kill everybody along the way that they can. And it's a real problem that Israel is dealing with, and all of us and the rest of the world are dealing with. And because of their ideological motivation, unfortunately, I tend to lean towards more of a military solution because I don't see an alternative solution. They're not going to, you can't just buy them out. You can't just offer alternatives to these people. But
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, I agree. I tend to lean towards the military option, but the only thing I'm trying to say is that, I don't view these things as purely. I'm not trying to, like Dave Smith. He's always just coming down on the same. Right? He's predictable, and I'm just trying to say that there's nuance and there's valuable criticisms or ideas or beliefs on both sides of these issues.
yeah,
These things are
that's my
complicated.
frustration with these people. Sorry to cut you off, but that's ultimately my frustration with these people. Is fine. You can. I'm willing to debate anything, and I'm willing to talk about any topic, but if you're just so unwilling to hear other sides, if you're so unwilling to introduce nuance to your argument, like you have a position as Dave Smith, as a libertarian, you have a position, and all I'm hearing is you trying to justify your own position. I'm not hearing you bring nuance. I'm not hearing you say, I understand the Israeli side. I understand the Ukrainian side. I understand why these people fight. I don't hear those arguments from people like Mehdi Hassan. I don't hear those arguments from people like Owen Jones. Owen Jones spends all his days on Twitter just blasting Israel, saying the dumbest shit. And it's always the same thing. Is there's this lack of nuance. There's this lack of a willingness to view what the other side that the other side might have a valid point and a valid argument, and introduce that into your own thinking and say, let me hear what their argument, that's a good argument or it's not. But
But yeah, it's funny that you say that because it is complicated because again, this goes back to the arguments we're saying about, not holding any absolute beliefs because there is almost always another side or another argument to almost every issue, right? These things are super complicated, and anybody, trying to present any sort of conflict as one-sided, you can more than likely bet that they're going to be ideologically motivated. And you saw this in the Ethan Hassan debate where Hassan couldn't concede one point that Ethan was making, right? It was all just one sided. Israel's the devil. Israelis, they're all bad. They can never be victims. They can never have any legitimate arguments. Nothing. Like he couldn't concede anything, right? It's all just Palestine is the perfect victim. Palestinians are the perfect victim no matter what they do, no matter what happens. It's all just, one sided. And again, this is a good indication of people that think like this, of, you should just dismiss them because you know that in most issues, these things are not. But at the same time, I say this, but at the same time, I think that we should be wary in specific instances of this obsession of always trying to view things in a 50-50 way. Again, I think this is a good default and a good heuristic, but we should be wary because I think this obsession with always making certain things as, this side has this side has that side. I think there are specific instances like Israel or like current Israel right now, Israel against Hamas. I think that you can historically, you can make the argument that Palestine had a good reason to fight back. Palestinians had been living there more than, Israelis or Jewish people. They had reasons to be mad. They have legit reasons to be mad. And so you can make a good argument on the pro Palestine side, historically speaking. But what you can't do is present this 50-50 argument to terrorist organization, jihadist terrorist organizations like Hamas, right? There's specific examples in conflicts or history where things are just one-sided, right? A person's just it's like the example of a person walking by on the street, right? Or you're just walking along in the street and you see these two people fighting in an alley. You're not going to automatically assume that they both have equal reasons as to why they're fighting each other, right? A person could have just been walking by and he could have just been punched in the face by some random stranger, and for all we know, that's what happened, right? You're not going to automatically assume that this is 50-50, and you can apply that same principle to global conflicts and say that Israel historically might have been, oppressive, or might have been the victimizer, or might have been the victim. But I think right now, given how or we know what Hamas is and we know what Israel is, and Israel at its worst is not anywhere near compared to what Hamas is through their intentions, right? And yeah, I think that's important because I see a lot of I still watch, even though Destiny's a little crazy and he says a lot of crazy shit, but he's still a smart guy that I appreciate his perspective, and I think that he's the type of person, especially in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, who tries to play the both sides a little bit too much. He almost always leans towards the pro-Israel side, but he tries to present, especially when it comes to Hamas, as like, oh, Hamas having legitimate reasons to be mad, or what happened. He tries to explain away the Second Intifada as what the reason why the Second Intifada happened was because the peace talks broke down and Palestinians were mad that there was no resolution. And so because there was no resolution to the conflict, that led to the Second Intifada. But again, this is this obsession with it being 50-50, but in reality, this wasn't a 50-50 thing. The reason why the peace talks failed in the Taba summit and Camp David was because Arafat was scared that if he approved any sort of deal and approved the state, the Palestinians and Hamas would be mad because it would mean that they're no longer the ultimate Palestinian goal is to destroy Israel and kick out the Israelis that they view as being not rightfully there. And so if Arafat would have accepted anything less than a complete right of return or a complete one state Palestinian state in that land, Arafat would have been risking his life. And that's one of there's well documented as to why Arafat walked away from a great deal in Camp David and the Taba summit. And so this idea that the Second Intifada was because of Ariel Sharon, or was because the Palestinians were mad that there was no state, that's just, it belies history, and it belies the point, and it also belies the fact that people can have really bad reasons as to why they commit certain acts, right? The acts of terrorism, acts of these acts, horrible acts of terrorism in the Second Intifada, and during October 7th, and also a bunch in the meantime, in that time period, you can have these ideological beliefs that don't map on towards anything tangible that any person like me or you would understand. And this is what a lot of people, secular people, especially on the left, just completely have such a hard time understanding, that You can be motivated to act, to do horrible things through an ideological, religious, jihadist lens. And yeah, and this lens doesn't necessarily have to map onto anything tangible in the real world, right? There can be really bad reasons, but also good reasons, because if you understand that worldview, it makes sense as to why you would want to go sacrifice your life and blow yourself up, or do what X, kill innocent people, if you follow these Islamist, teachings. And so yeah.
But it's funny how the other side, not funny, but it's sad how, I'm not saying Destiny is guilty of this, but the generally the pro-Palestinian side, how they'll excuse any behavior by groups like Hamas or the PLO or resistance movements like the Second Intifada, and they'll excuse civilian deaths, outright civilian deaths, like murdering people on buses, blowing themselves up, and
Then Israel.
murdering. But then Israel's like the military actions, like legit military actions that anybody under any sort of scrutiny can tell you these are legitimate military operations. Like, yes, they come with collateral, but why is it that Hamas gets a pass and that's a resistance movement, but when Israel does it, it's genocide? Or and that's why it's so hard to take these people seriously. That's why it's so hard for me to concede any of their points. Not concede, but to just take them seriously. To continue to listen to them as somebody that is going to shape my worldview or and inform my worldview. I don't listen to these people as serious people. I don't listen to them for their insights. I don't listen to them to say, "Oh, this is who I'm going to trust on this topic." I listen to them because they're just being insane. That they're just. I look at them like a parody. I look at them like, "What are you saying?" Like, it's just entertainment value at this point. Because what am I really getting from this? It's not nuanced. It's not. You're telling me that Israel is not right to to take out Hamas, but you're telling me that the second intifada is justified because this is a resistance movement? It's not. There's no way in hell that blowing yourself up on a bus repeatedly and killing 1,000 people during the second intifada was justified. And yeah, that's ultimately why I don't take these people seriously. But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I think with the Israel-Palestine issue, I think I've reached my researching limit, in the sense that I'm pretty confident in what I believe historically. I think that, both of these populations have a legitimate claim to this land. And I think that any type of future, solution to this incredible problem is going to have to be a two-state solution. And it's going to have to be, both of these people acknowledging the suffering of both people. But the thing that I do still grapple with to this day is Israel's military response to October 7th. And I think that, especially recently, where we've been seeing these really horrific stories coming out about Israel firing on these medical workers. I don't know if you saw that
yeah,
story.
yeah.
And yeah, just like a lot of the war crimes that have happened, not a lot, but there's clearly been the health, or what is it, the kitchen, I forget, the kitchen aid workers that were
Yeah.
killed as well. And we've seen just very reckless behavior from Israel and from Netanyahu. And yeah, that's one thing that I do grant the anti-Israel critics, is that, there are legitimate criticisms to be made of, obviously, of any country, but especially right now of Israel. I think, looking back on on that time, especially right after October 7th, I think that, sadly, Netanyahu has, for political purposes, dragged this war on for this long. But I think Israel would have
Now he's
been.
gonna expand it. I don't know if you saw the
Yeah,
the
yeah, and then
reporting.
again, that's another thing
Now he's
too
gonna
of
invade and
yeah, now again, he's gonna reinvade. He's gonna sacrifice even more Israeli soldiers, and it's just like it's turning into the the forever war that a lot of these anti-war people love to say. And I think even a majority now of Israelis just want to end the war and bring the hostages home, even if it means Hamas remains. And yeah, I think looking back on that time, I think Israel would have been better off, especially right after October 7th. You know, it sounds fucked up to say, and I'm not saying they should have freaking nuked Gaza, but I think they should have put themselves in like, okay, we need a right now we have the world on our side. You know, in a matter of time, that's going to change, especially if we drag this war on. And so we need to act quick, and we need to, yes, there's going to be a lot of civilian, collateral damage, but we need to do what we can to get rid of Hamas. And yeah, and I think that the fact that it's dragged on for this long has also really hurt Israel, because it's just been a year and a half of just nonstop shitty stories and images coming out of Gaza. And again, there's no way to prosecute this war without innocent people dying. Like, that's just a thing that people have a hard time understanding, but it's just the reality of the situation, right? There's no way to conduct this war without civilians dying, especially the way Hamas built up this infrastructure of tunnels, and it made it impossible to reach them without getting through innocent civilians in the first place. But that being said, you already knew that, but you're kind of just playing into their trap, because if you look at the long game, the more Israel alienates all these countries and all these people, like, it matters. Like, I get that sentiment that a lot of Israelis have of fuck everybody else. Like, it's up to us. You know, after the Holocaust, nobody came to save us, so nobody's going to come to save us. We can't depend on the world, so it doesn't matter if the world hates us, right? We're going to do what we're going to do. I get that mentality, but at the same time, like, it matters in terms of your own survival to have the world's opinion. Not everybody, obviously, but it matters to have people on your side. You want to have countries. You don't want to be a pariah. You don't want to be, shunned from the rest of the world. And again, humans are not these logical creatures, right? But for us that care about this issue, that I've actually studied it, that I've actually read, right, we can better understand where Israel's coming from. But if you're just a random person that's not necessarily invested in politics, or you just happen to watch the news every now and then, or again, to any casual person seeing daily, repeated, weekly, for over a year now, just shitty stories, innocent kids dying, horrific images coming out, and now you're ramping it up after a year and a half. Now you're ramping it up even more. I think it's just you can't play this game. I don't know.
And you also don't want to be a pariah when you're one trying to normalize relations, or we're trying to normalize relations with neighbors that have historically hated you. And two, there's this like looming conflict threatening with a much larger military force with Iran. And you've been in conflict with Gaza for years now, and then now you're going to be part of another conflict. Like, these are things that Israel has to be measured about. But it goes back to the what we were talking about with foreign policy. I think the best method that I've seen the most is kind of like what you were alluding to, but just a quick, decisive action with no intentions to linger about, no intentions to to finish the job, quote unquote. Like, just quick, decisive. Like, Article 5 was invoked in Kosovo, right? We stopped Slobodan Milosevic from committing his genocide. Got in, got out. That's it. Like, we didn't go in there for regime change. It was quick and decisive military action, and it was not anything else. And that's, I think, the best way to use military power, and that's the best way to have something that's effective and decisive. And like you said, like, after October 7th, it should have been quick. It should have been a month, maybe less, maybe a couple weeks long operation where you just really just bombard Gaza. And it sounds callous. It sounds horrible to say. It sounds so wrong coming out of my mouth, but it's true. Like, it would have been much more effective if you were decisive and quick and had an actionable plan. And then you said, this is
It's
this is
it's
what you dealt
it,
with.
yeah, and again, it's like, it sounds fucked up to say, but you know, Well, looking at the long run and looking at it from a utilitarian perspective, ultimately what you want is less people to suffer. And I think Israel would have been, if they would have taken this like really hardline approach, a month or 2 months, 3 months after the war, and, no aid, no, nothing going into Gaza, going after it's really hard. It's impossible to get to Hamas through these tunnels without going through civilians. But yeah, just bombing the shit out of them, as callous as that sounds, because you have no other option at that point. And this is Hamas putting these people in front of them. And so ultimately, the people responsible are Hamas for doing all this and causing all this. So I don't feel bad saying it, but
I
yeah,
think ultimately this might be a decision that Israel takes, and we could very well be heading down that path of, if Iran fucks around with Israel, because Israel's been going through this war of attrition. Like, the parallels are just there between World War II and the US. Like, US went through this war of attrition with Germany, with the Axis powers, and then they turned around and still had a fight with Japan, and they said fuck this, and they dropped the nuke, and they said we're not dealing with another 2-3 years of a war of attrition. And that's a very real possibility of what we're dealing with right now. Israel's been dealing with this war for what, 2-3 years now, like 2 years now. I can't remember how long. Going on 3 years, I think. But that's a very distinct possibility, is that I don't think Israel would ever nuke Gaza, because obviously the proximity of Gaza, like, you're just making southern Israel unlivable. But Iran's not that lucky. Like, Iran, if they do anything off the cuff right now with Israel, I don't think Israel has it in them to subsequently fight another 2-3 year war with Iran. And I think many of their leaders are just saying, we're not dealing with this. We're just going to drop nukes on Tehran and fuck it. Like, we'll deal with the consequences after. And yeah, this is why people need to be on very high alert, because this is reality. Like, we could be dealing with a nuclear fallout here in the next year or so.
well, luckily, Trump's in charge. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
luckily Trump's,
I'm
yeah.
sure his sane and completely normal brain will lead us to the promised land.
Yeah, were there any closing remarks or any last
Um,
points you wanted to make?
yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. I guess it sucks. It's really shitty times that we're living in, and I don't know. I wish, just sucks seeing so much suffering going on in the world, and you know, so many, not just suffering, but so much stupidity in the face of that suffering, and so much excuse making. And yeah, you'd think that the most prominent people right now in our society, commentators and stuff, you'd think they'd have a little bit more sense, and you'd think that they would be more attuned to the facts at the very least. And it's just crazy to me how blackpilling, I think since October 7th, but even before that, how blackpilling it is to see how so many people are just, again, immune to logic, and immune to coherent arguments, immune to historical facts. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, for a lot of people, that's the most blackpilling aspect of everything, is for so many people, it doesn't matter what you're saying. Like, it doesn't matter what you can be making the most coherent, logical argument ever made, and people will just not hear what you said, completely make up a thing that you said, or just completely ignore it and move on to the next thing, or talk about something that they want to talk about. And it's just yeah, I think it's just been as I've grown older, I've realized how emotional and non-logical humans are. And um and yeah, it's been blackpilling, and but I don't know, at the end of the day, it is what it is. So
Yeah. And yeah, you would hope that these commentators would stop carrying water for the groups that are, to blame for a lot of the
Yeah, like Hassan is
Yeah.
the most popular streamer on Twitch, political streamer on Twitch. And this guy, you should watch the I'll send you some highlights of the debate, but it again, he got so much wrong. And it's funny because a lot of people like on the outside objectively saw that he clearly lost the debate, but even still within his orbit, like so many people just making excuses. And again, I'm just like fully just not surprised, but I'm just shocked at the ability of the human brain to rationalize and confabulate excuses or just bullshit in its head just to continue its prior existing beliefs. And it just, I'm like, how does the brain do that? Like, it's a kind of a feat of human ingenuity, the fact that it's able to twist itself in these pretzel like, mental gymnastics of to hold this logically somewhat consistent view and attempt to hold it. And it's just, again, it's like, wow, how did you manage that one? And so I saw this sorry, I saw this video of like these guys. I don't know if you've heard of them, the Vanguard. But after the debate, like it was just clear like Hassan was destroyed. But I was curious to see a lot of the leftist response to the debate, because I'm like, okay, how are they going to rationalize this horrible debate? And there's this stupid fucking TV or just TV show, the streamer show of these two guys, like young kids, like in their 20s, but they're super lefties, and they're talking about the debate. And it's like 20 minutes of them talking about the debate of they admitted that Hassan lost, and he like clearly, you know, just lost the debate and Ethan dominated. But it was just them for 20 minutes, not talking at all of like anything of substance of the debate, not bringing up any points at all. And it was just like them mad that Hassan didn't like, bro, why didn't you like come up with like it's just so general, like above, and no examples given, not anything. Like in the debate they were talking about how Hassan has denied the rapes of October 7th, about how Hassan, is making excuses for terrorists, pretty much promoting, endorsing terrorism, pro Houthi, all these fucking crazy things that he said. And yeah, they didn't address any of it, and they're just mad that Hassan looked bad. And it's just, I don't know, it's entertaining, but it's just, again, it's just like blackpilling in the sense that, a lot of people just don't give a fuck. Like it doesn't, the truth doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
It's just very cynical, and it's very like, again, you grow up in a way thinking that most people think like you, but I don't know, there's a lot of people out there that it's very sad to know that there's just, like, I don't know how people live with themselves, like being just so blatantly like lying.
Yeah.
And like with the thing with Dave Smith too, it's just like he's been corrected on things like the Russia Ukraine, about the phone call, and the like all these things that are just verifiably wrong. The coup, like, bro, how long would it take for somebody like Dave Smith to Google or ChatGPT something like the Newland phone call? Was it the Newland?
Yeah. That she was
Yeah, or
made the
the
phone call and
quote
handing
unquote
out water and
the
cookies.
coup, calling it a coup because what we supported some of the protesters, like, oh, you caught us supporting Ukrainians fighting against some Russian fucking dipshit. Like, well, like these
Even the
things.
argument that they made, I think it was Senator Chris Murphy, they brought up this clip that
Yeah,
Chris Murphy was talking about regime change in Ukraine. And then he
yeah.
went on literally in that same clip to talk about how the US shouldn't be involved in regime change. Like, dude, the same clips that you guys are talking about, like that they don't make any sense.
Yeah, these things like again, it's just, you'd think these people are like at the very least well intentioned, but it's all just in service of a narrative. I don't know the ultimate answer. Like people like Hassan's worse clearly than Dave Smith, but even Dave Smith, where like he's been corrected on these things. Like I've watched older debates of him in like 2022 or 2023 of him debating these things, and like he has no response, and he's still trotting on these 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 talking points, and it's like, bro, like are you that retarded, or are you just lying at this point? Like I don't get it.
I mean,
Well,
it's got
I
to
don't
be
know.
ideological, but
Yeah, it's
because I mean,
ideological.
I understand it to some extent. Like, I was definitely more ideologically driven when I was younger, and I was willing to look the other way or excuse certain things, or just even convolute my brain in different ways where it didn't make sense looking back on some of the things you believe. And that's the Christopher Hitchens things always sticks with me about. Doesn't matter what you know, it's like how you think, and that's ultimately what's so important. Like, dude, what you know that doesn't really mean shit. It's how you arrived at those conclusions. Like, it's how you think about information when it's presented to you. Like, that's ultimately what matters. But
Yep.
yep. Oh yeah, I think we'll end it here, and then next time we'll talk about race and IQ and Charles Murray.
God. We're really gonna, yeah, I mean, I guess we can end it real quick on that, but yeah, I don't know. I've thought about, like, especially if I want to start being more like politically, commenting and uploading videos and stuff, like, do I want to go into a thing like race and IQ and all this shit? I don't know. At this point, I'm just like, dude, like, we're all gonna die. At the end
Did
of
you
the
see
day,
the
like,
Sam Harris rebuttal on Ezra Klein?
uh, no, it was in the second half of it. No, the second
Yeah,
half, the part that's blocked. Did you ever send me the login for the full episodes, or
I thought I
were you
did.
gonna
I
send
thought
me
I
that?
sent it to you. I thought I sent it
Oh,
to you,
I don't
but
think I got it.
I'll send it to you again. Yeah, but
What do you say?
well, actually, his business partner brought up a lot of it, but Sam was basically saying how Ezra's never admitted that he was wrong, and that it's really hard for him. And his business partner made, I thought, like a pretty compelling argument, but Ezra like tried to cancel Sam Harris. Like, he tried to like blacklist him and like get him removed. Like, if Sam wasn't in the position that he was in, like he would have been canceled. Like quote unquote definition, like that's literally what canceled means, and smeared. And Sam was just making the argument that he's still paying some cost for that. There's some people out there that still think Sam Harris is a racist, and Ezra's just never admitted fault with that culture that he helped promulgate, that whole cancel culture, that whole race and IQ. And
Yeah, it's so funny hearing them talk about. Did you hear that Ezra clip? Or you heard it, right? But he's talking to Lex Friedman about it.
yeah, Lex, yeah,
Yeah, and then I don't know if you saw that Matthew Iglesias recent article that he had on like taboo topics, and where he
no, I
brought
didn't read
up
that one.
race and IQ.
No, I didn't read that one.
Well, yeah, but he's just basically saying, like, it's funny how we went from a point, like, this happened like 7 or 8 years ago, right? The whole that was in 2018. Um, yeah, initially their argument back then was that this wasn't scientifically based, and now it's Matthew Iglesias was in this recent article of his where he's basically saying that certain things like should be taboo, like we shouldn't talk about race and IQ, like it should be. And this is an argument that I'm open to. Like I can understand having like a noble lie, and this concept of not necessarily bringing up things that might cause more harm than good. I'm not saying I agree with it, but it makes sense. But it's just funny how their argument, like they just gave up arguing against the validity of a claim and arguing simply of, is this useful to society? So yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about the Camille Foster thing, because I wanted to talk about the whole story in general about like that lady using the N word. Oh, fuck, dude, we could talk about it now, but it's just my eyes. Like, I got really bad fucking dry eyes, dude. I'm already fucking feeling it. And it fucking sucks. But yeah, no, the quick point that I wanted to make on it was that, yeah, but somebody like Camille, who's so smart, and like I agree with him on like 99, 95% of issues. But when it comes to this, like, he's so dismissive of the idea of a concept of race. And like the way he was talking about like it's so like we know that there is no such thing as race. And I get his argument if he's talking about like this absolute black and white, we know exactly if you're a white person and we can determine it here in this. It's like, okay, yeah. But if you're talking about things like genetic populations or, your genetic family tree or extended family tree, right? These are things that are just verifiable. And, with more time, we know more about the the actual reality of such a thing as populations. If you don't want to call it race, don't call it race. But this idea that there aren't populations and group differences, and it's just with time we're seeing.
It's just silly because in genetics, it's such a blurry line. Like there's no, if you look archaeologically, there's no, there's not a single fossil that's going to tell you, oh, this was a Homo sapien or
Yeah,
this
exactly.
was a Homo
It's the
erectus.
same
Like,
thing.
but
Yeah.
we know that there's differences. We know that there are literal differences between Homo erectus and humans. And at what point throughout our history did we just magically become Homo sapiens? So that's hard to parse. But there's differences in populations, and to not acknowledge that, like that's silly. I can look at you and tell you that we're not the same. Like, bro, just look at my skin color. Like, look at like all these
Yeah.
things. We're not the same. And it's
Yeah,
silly for him to make that
phenotypes,
argument.
through phenotypically and also genetically, we can see these differences, group differences. And even now AI, have you seen these like AI can determine the race of a human being simply by looking at its skull, or like, yeah, AI is like getting better and better at detecting the race of a person. And it's just like all these like random facts that we have about humans, and like it's all just pointing to the same picture. And you see these same patterns that are repeated. Like groups have differences amongst themselves, just like individuals have differences amongst themselves, and they vary on different human traits. It's such a simple concept that again, like I feel like Camille has always been like addicted to this like race, like, no, there's no such thing as I'm not a black man, like I'm not a black man. And like it's been a part of his identity for so long that I think he's very like just immune to even hearing. Like, again, I'm not saying I believe these things, I'm not saying like these things are black and white. I think that there is like still an argument going on about like what do we call race? Like, is it a social construct? Like, how do we differentiate between a quote unquote race or a population or a genetic cluster of human being? Like, what are we talking about? And there is a good debate to be had about that. But somebody like Emil's like saying like no, the whole thing is bullshit. And it's just like, bro, like you're not even dealing with like the actual arguments that are, if you want to disagree, disagree, but don't act like there isn't like really good arguments to be had on the other side of the position that you're trying to take. And like, I don't know. I think that.
That'll come with time. That'll come with better science and the ability for us to get a clearer picture on the genome
Yeah.
and like
Yeah,
make
exactly.
full distinctions. Like, and once that comes out, once we have base level resolutions of the genome, it's going to be really hard to parse. Like, oh, there's no differences. Like, we're going to be able to see, similarities between groups. We're going to be able to tell, these groups have these genotypes and phenotypes, and we're going to be able to cluster those people and say this is what we mean by differences between groups.
And
But yeah,
nobody's saying these things are like you were saying earlier, like these things are not obviously black and white. Like sex is a much more clear, like cleaner picture of like male and female, like the gametes, like all this stuff. It's like a much more easier argument to be made about it. You can say something like sex is real and not have to go through all this like scientific. I mean, obviously you're gonna have to do that, but it's a much easier argument to be made. But a thing like race, it is much more complicated, and I think nobody's denying that. And but at the same time, like to act like the whole thing is like this, like oh, like you're a race realist, or like, oh, you're like, bro, like again, like you're not even dealing with the actual arguments that are being made. Like there is good to like somebody that I follow on Twitter, Wilfred Riley. Do you know about him?
I don't think so.
Oh, really? You should follow him. He's like a really smart guy. But but yeah, he makes really good coherent arguments against like he acknowledges IQ, he acknowledges population variation, but he makes coherent arguments against the racial social construct, quote unquote, and he makes coherent arguments. And I'm not saying that there isn't a good debate to be had, but what it's that's different with the Camille stance of like the whole thing's bullshit, like no, like that's like, bro, like you're not even dealing with the arguments that are presenting themselves every day through the science and through so much. Like it's a pattern. Like you just notice patterns as you grow older, and you notice the why is it that disproportionately young black men commit so much crime? Why is it that from this genetic cluster of human beings we see such a different type of behavior? Oh, and this is another thing that pissed me off so much, when they try to say that you see the same violent pattern amongst most countries around the world if you're low income. Like, I don't know if I want to go back and rehear it, but I'm pretty sure that's the argument that he said. And that's just verifiably not true. Even in America, when you compare low income populations from white people or Hispanic or Asians compared to low income black Americans, you don't get the same amount of crime. And yeah, it's just like, dude, you're saying like just factually incorrect things. And yeah, it's just annoying, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is more complicated though, because that whole thing that happened with that girl. Did you see the? Oh yeah, I'm sure you saw where she called that kid an N word. Like there's a really interesting debate to be had about what is the proper reaction to that, and I lean more towards the side of, obviously you don't want to be giving this freaking girl or lady who just called the kid and the N word. You don't want to make her rich, but I do think that there is an argument to be made about, what is the proper response to that Carmelo Anthony kid who stabbed the kid and then raised a bunch of money off of murdering somebody? Like, how do you respond to that? And I think that's what happened in this case, that a lot of people were pissed off, and they're like, okay, well, you're gonna raise money for a murderer. Like, well, this lady's just saying the N word, and then you're gonna compare the two as if these are both like even on the same plane. Like this, hearing that Piers Morgan episode, I think it was yesterday or today. Did you see that Mark Lamont Hill like just spazzed out over like the like, don't say the N word, don't. Did you see that?
No, I heard Camille talk about it on the episode.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, it's so ridiculous. But again, that whole Piers Morgan uh debate was them just going back and forth of, yeah, it's really bad that she said the N word, and it's also really bad that that kid murdered the kid. It's like, bro, like what? Like the fuck? Like, did you just hear yourself? Like, you're talking about a fucking word versus somebody getting stabbed in the heart and murdered. Like, what the like? How is this even? Like, yeah, okay, that lady's shitty person. I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to defend her, but like the fact that we're even having this conversation as like one is even like remotely comparable to the other, like just shows how insane that our world is, or country is right now.
Yeah.
I don't
I mean, a lot of this was driven by grifters and charlatans like Ibram X. Kendi and Mark
know.
Lamont
Yeah,
Hill
yeah,
and
especially
people like that.
after
Yeah,
the woke.
especially after George Floyd.
Yeah, but yeah, it'd be interesting to dive deeper in and further shit.
Yeah. But
uh,
yeah, I mean, I can look at the Piers Morgan thing. That lady, I don't know. I didn't really have any initial
yeah,
reactions, but it is interesting to see it juxtaposed with the Carmelo Anthony thing, because that was something that I didn't pay too much attention to it, and then you see the story and it's like, okay, that makes sense. Like people are gonna be tribal and like calling
Yeah.
you out, and yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
it's funny because I was thinking a lot about the philosophical aspect of it because there's like a deontological argument to be made of, as a matter of principle, you don't want to reward people that call kids the N-word, but at the same time, you can make a utilitarian argument that, well, if the wokes are going to defend and raise money for a murderer, then, okay, well, as a response to that, we're going to defend people that, are going to get their lives ruined over saying a stupid word. And so yeah, it's more utilitarian because you're just, an eye for an eye, fighting fire with fire. So there is an argument, I guess, to be made from it, but I don't know. It is complicated because again, you don't want to reward shitty behavior, but at the same time, if people are, you know, calling for race war, then okay, well, if you want to put up a fight, then let's put up a fight. And so I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can next time we'll talk about that topic because that would be interesting, and especially on Camille's race essentialism, because that would be there's not much of an argument that he has to make, especially as you dive deeper into the science and genetics and things like that. But yeah, did you have anything else or anything else you want to? That's it for me. Cool. But yeah, I'll stop the recording.